welcome to my channel. I hope you all are doing well. I have a Harley bug here that is really wanting to be petted. Anyways, today we are going to be talking about how anxiety affects your body. That's what we're talking about today. You guys know what to do. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications of when I upload. And you guys, we are so close to 3K. Make sure you subscribe if you're liking the content I am producing. I know a lot of you guys aren't subscribed, so please, it only takes 2 seconds of your time to just hit that subscribe button. Now, with that, let's start talking about anxiety. Do you want to say hi, Bug? Thank you, Bug. Oh, she's wanting to be petted really bad. She's been like this all morning, my sweet Bug. A few things to remember when it comes to anxiety is everyone at some point is going to feel anxiety. This is a normal thing, but if it's chronic anxiety, meaning it's a constant thing, you're constantly feeling it, it lasts longer than 6 months, which is the criteria for something to become chronic, that can wreak havoc on the body and interfering with your quality of life. Some of the consequences from chronic anxiety are increased breathing and heart rate and concentrated blood flow to your brain to prepare you to face this intense situation. It can also cause lightheadedness and nausea. However, an excessive or persistent state of anxiety can have a devastating effect on not only your physical health, but your mental health as well. How exactly anxiety works is someone or something raises the alarm in your body, right? And this causes the release of certain hormones and chemicals in your body to lead to body-wide changes, preparing you to handle this situation, to either fight, flight, or freeze. And we're going to get into that a little later, but anxiety is more commonly seen in middle-aged women than men, but this doesn't mean children, men, elders, teenagers don't feel anxiety. It's just not as much. I hope that makes sense. And remember, everyone faces it, like I said earlier. In fact, 18.1% of adults deal with some type of anxiety disorder. And we're about to talk about anxiety disorders. What are some of the more common anxiety disorders? But I want you to know that you can have multiple anxiety disorders. For instance, I have phobias, which is a form of anxiety disorder, and we will talk about that. I have social anxiety, chronic anxiety, as well as PTSD. And a lot of people are like that, where they have that more than one anxiety disorder. So what are these disorders? Well, the first one I'm going to tell you about is GAD. It is generalized anxiety disorder. This is when one has an increased amount of anxiety for no logical reason. Think of fibromyalgia when I'm saying this. There is one form of fibromyalgia where you have this pain but no point of origin. So it don't mean that you don't have anxiety if there isn't an apparent reason. You still are feeling it. It is not in your mind. I'm going to say real quick, I do have my window open, so I'm sorry if there's additional noise. Okay, so generalized anxiety disorder affects 6.8 million Americans. That is 3.1% each year. How it's diagnosed is that you would have anxiety for 6 months or more. And you can either have a mild case or a severe case. The mild case doesn't affect your day-to-day activities, where the severe case of it has a more profound impact on one's life. Social anxiety is next, and this is one of the ones I have, so I will kind of tell you a little bit about my experiences. But this is when one has a paralyzing fear of social situations. And this actually affects 15 million Americans each year. That is 12.1%. The typical age this starts is 13, which I'd like to add for a moment that there's a lot of disorders that start at a very young age that a lot of adults overlook. But this absolutely can be a factor. So if you're thinking your teenager or child is just rebelling or acting out, think that there actually could be anxiety there or depression, things like that. If I remember right, the S word on screen actually can start as young as 5 years old. But when it comes to anxiety, it specifically can appear between the ages of 13 and 18 and affects 31.9% of children. That is a huge number. So with me, I don't like being in a big group of people. I just get really anxious because I may not know all these people, or I don't know what they'll think of me, and all that starts rattling in my head. I go to grocery stores at as early in the day as I can because there are less people there. Same with going to the gym. I hated going there anytime after 10 because it started getting real packed. I can't handle a lot of people. It's just, thinking about it right now is giving me anxiety. Oh, that's why I have a certain incense going that's relaxing. So the next is PTSD, which is something you guys, if you've been following me, have heard me talk about it multiple occasions. But this develops after something traumatic happens, and the symptoms can present immediately or delayed for years, which is something that happened to me. This affects 7.7 million Americans, which is 3.6%. Now, when my symptoms got started, the traumatic event happened years prior. It took about maybe 3 years for my symptoms to make themselves known because I kept pushing back this traumatic event in my head and not wanting to face it. When you do that, symptoms will find a way to creep out, which mine at first started with traumatic nightmares, which I do have a video on, and I'll link that in the description box down below. Let's move on to the next anxiety disorder, which is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. And this is when one performs a particular ritual over and over and over again. This is the compulsive part of obsessive compulsive disorder. The obsessive part is experiencing intrusive or unwanted thoughts that can be distressing. For example, habitual hand washing, counting, cleanliness, a need for symmetry, things like this are some of the things that make up OCD. The next disorder is phobias, which I mentioned earlier. This is a powerful urge to avoid a feared object or situation. This affects 19.3 million Americans, which is 9.1% that have a specific phobia. For mine, I'm like really afraid of spiders. When I see them, someone will tell me that they're this big, but I swear they're like this. It's just, I can't handle it. Also, I'm really afraid of flying. Every time I fly, I freak out, especially when turbulence hits, when we take off and land. I can't handle it. I have to be given something to be able to fly. The other thing I'm afraid of is tornadoes. I can't handle the thought of a tornado warning or sirens going off or whatever. That is because I used to live in Wisconsin, and almost every summer you have a tornado. Well, at least when I lived there, it was like every summer. So I actually just recently had a nightmare about tornadoes, so it's kind of funny we're talking about phobias. Lastly, we're going to talk about is panic disorder. This is things like panic attacks, spontaneous feelings of anxiety, terror, or thoughts of impending doom. This affects 6.8 million people, and that is 2.7%. Some symptoms of this is heart palpitations, chest pain, shortness of breath, which all activate that fight, flight, or freeze mode I talked about earlier. Panic is upping the rush of anxiety at once, and that peaks at about 10 minutes. But let's go a little more in depth, right? Long-term anxiety and panic attacks can cause the release of stress hormone on a regular basis, which can increase the frequency of symptoms such as headaches, dizziness, and depression. Speaking of the brain, when you feel anxious and stressed, your brain floods the nervous system with hormones and chemicals. They are designed to help you respond to a threat with adrenaline and cortisol. How the brain responds to stress is by something I mentioned earlier, the fight, flight, or freeze. It releases hormones to prepare the body to combat threat. It redirects energy and resources from certain parts of the body to produce a more efficient response to stressors. When the threat passes, your bodily functions all return to normal. But when you have chronic anxiety, this does not happen. The brain and body have a harder time returning to normal, leaving you with experiencing insomnia and pain, stomach problems, shortness of breath, and sweating, as well as leaving you vulnerable. This causes a lot of effects to you and your body. When you have a long-term exposure to stress, hormones can become harmful to your physical health in the long run, as well as long-term exposure to cortisol, which I'm going to be making a separate video on that, but it can bring things like weight gain to the table, which I don't want it at the table. So what are some other things that can happen? Well, we're going to talk about them in sections by each system within your body. So the first one we're going to talk about is cardiovascular system. And this can come about in ways of rapid heart rate, palpitations, chest pain, a risk of high blood pressure, and heart disease. In the digestive system, which I'm also going to be making a separate video on, it can cause stomach ache, nausea, diarrhea, loss of appetite, and IBS. The immune system, anxiety can trigger your fight or flight, as we've talked about multiple times. It floods chemicals and hormones through the body like adrenaline. It also causes the immune system to not work as properly as it should, leaving you again more vulnerable to things happening to you, all these different symptoms that we are talking about now and will be talking about a little later. It allows all that to happen. Other things that can happen are headaches, muscle tension, insomnia, depression, social isolation. The long-term anxiety can affect or correspond with GI problems, type 2 diabetes, heart problems, respiratory disorders, reproductive issues, and immune system dysfunction. With short-term anxiety, it increases pulse and breathing rate to allow the brain to receive more oxygen. So there's 3 questions you should be asking when it comes to anxiety, period. Okay? Number 1 is the level of my anxiety justified? Am I reacting correctly to the type of situation or the type of stressors that is happening? Or am I over analyzing it, getting way too anxious for something that don't warrant it? Number 2, how often does this happen? How often are you experiencing anxiety, and to what? And lastly, how long does it last? Because just maybe you are having panic attacks or some other form of anxiety. But when it comes to anxiety, it is broken down into 3 categories. The first one being cognitive, which is in your mind. The attention shifts to the source of the threat, you worrying. Number 2 is physical, which is in the body. This increases heart rate, muscle tension, shallow breathings, nausea, and dizziness. This can have an increase in heart rate, muscle tension, shallow breathing, nausea, and dizziness. And number 3 is behavioral. engaging in behaviors that protect against anxiety. For instance, coping skills to combat what you're feeling. If you catch it early enough, the work is basically done. And the last thing I want to go over when it comes to what... Hi, Harley. To what anxiety can do to the body is by talking about the symptoms. So, fear and uneasy, being unable to focus, muscle stiffness, dry mouth. The next is rumination, which is thinking over bad experiences repeatedly. You also have sweating, palpitations, stomach discomfort, dizziness, restlessness, unable to be calm and still. Pins and needle sensation, aches and pains such as headache and back pain, difficulty breathing or rapid breathing, feeling choked, hot flashes, sleeping problems, grinding your teeth, nausea, constipation, and even changes in your sex drive. So, anxiety affects so much when it comes to your body, and I think it's something most people don't realize, how much it affects your body and how much you have to do to stop anxiety from becoming so bad that it wreaks havoc on you. So catching it early when you're starting to feel that feeling of getting anxious, or you know a certain situation is going to cause that, avoid it, work on it, use coping skills, distract yourself. There is so much you can do to put pause on that anxiety. But with that, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Stay safe and well, and I will see you guys in the next one.